Hi everyone, I am screencasting this lecture on listening and speaking today. The first thing that I want you guys to do is to reflect. So after you read through these questions, take a moment and stop the video and just think about your own experiences learning a second language. What struggles did you have with oral language in particular? In other words, listening and speaking. What aspects of speaking were the most challenging? What aspects of listening were the most challenging? Try to be as specific as possible. What did you find most helpful in improving your listening and speaking abilities? And finally, what are the particular challenges of acquiring speaking and listening skills in a foreign language context? How is this different from an ESL context? I know many of you teach in foreign language context, but some of you teach in a ESL context. So what are the similarities and differences, do you think? So just pause the video and write down in your notebook. Really try to be specific and think about specific experiences of your own. My own story I've learned a number of different languages, but my story about learning Thai is really particular because I studied it here in the US for 2 years and I had never been to Thailand, and my only Thai that I really heard was in the classroom. My teacher used a grammar translation method, and so we almost never heard any Thai except for just individual words and sentences. And then we mainly learned to read. So she would write something in Thai on the board and we would read it out. The problems in terms of speaking were that I mainly learned this thing called reading register, which is how you sound when you read a word list or individual sentences. So my Thai speaking sounded entirely like reading register. And then Thai has a lot of formal and polite and impolite language and stuff like that. And I really only learned to speak very formal Thai. And finally, I could not speak or understand everyday Thai. So when I finally went to Thailand, it was really not helpful. And I did not know how to act in social situations. So I learned only a very formal Thai that was restricted mainly to individual sentences translated from English. The sentences we translated were like descriptions of the world, like the sky is blue, my dog ate my homework, in February I will drive my red car to the theater, stuff like that. So aside from a few stereotypical routines like greetings and requests, I did not learn the social conventions or social practices of communicating in everyday Thai. And although I could translate English sentences into Thai, they sounded very weird in Thai. Like you take the English way of saying something and translate it into Thai, and it just doesn't sound natural. Um, and when I first arrived in Bangkok, I could not understand anything that people were saying to me. Um, since I mainly knew this thing reading register, which meant not only was the pronunciation different, but also the expressions and the vocabulary that they used. And in addition, I was usually using hyper polite language, which people just laughed at or they were mad at. So, what does this mean for language? Language is a social practice. Um, Systemic functional linguistics kind of showed us this, and if you look at Mary Schleppegrell's work, she talks about this with academic language. What we're talking about here is that we need to question what language is. What is it exactly that we think we are teaching when we teach English? SFL shows us that we are not only teaching one thing, one single thing called English, but English is a multitude of things, of different ways of speaking, writing, and interacting. Unlike my Thai teacher who focused primarily on the ideational function of language, linguists now recognize that language has multiple functions beyond just describing the world. One of these functions is, of course, the ideational function, which is just how you describe things, right? It's sometimes people call it the referential function, the ideational function. It's just describing the world. The dog is brown or something. This function is about expressing and describing things, encoding information clearly and accurately. This function is usually the only one addressed in traditional grammar translation or behaviorist teaching approaches. However, language also serves other functions simultaneously. It is almost never simply just describing the world. Imagine you're about to walk out the door for dinner with your best friend or your life partner, and you say, "Okay, um, like ready to go." And she turns to you and says, "You're wearing flip-flops?" Is this person just describing the world, describing what you are wearing? In other words, is this sentence or utterance simply including the ideational function, just describing the world? Of course not. So what else is going on here? So you're wearing flip-flops, right? Of course it has the ideational function. This sentence is a statement. It describes the apparel worn by the addressee. You is only interpretable if one is in the context and knows to whom the speaker is addressing the statement. In other words, who is referred to by you, but nonetheless it's referring to what you are wearing. The interpersonal function, though, this utterance is a complaint. A complaint such as this can only be addressed by certain people to other certain people. In other words, it indicates something about the relationship between people. Addressing someone simply as you can also be socially dependent, especially in certain languages that have a number of different ways of referring to people. Like, for example, the choice of words and grammar can indicate something about the speaker's identity and the addressee's identity. So, notice that she didn't say, "Dude, you're wearing flip-flops," because that would mean something different about their relationship and about her identity, the type of person that would say dude. And also a textual function, which the textual function is how to build a text, how to mark what is going on, how to construct an interaction or a larger stretch of discourse. This complaint and the absence of the expected response to "let's go" marks a hesitation to proceed to what would normally be the next step in this interaction. Instead of saying, "Okay, yeah, let's go," the speaker produces a complaint. So that marks something about the place they are in the interaction or the text. Okay, let's turn to some of the ways that we think about multiplicity and variation in communication. It is also important to understand how our speech behavior varies across different contexts, and also how this behavior might be different in different communities. Delheims, a linguistic anthropologist, long ago developed the speaking model, he called it, for documenting and categorizing this kind of situational variation in communication. The first factor to take into consideration is the speech community. A speech community is any grouping of people who share similar norms or expectations regarding speech behavior. Take, for example, the community of Cantonese speakers in Hong Kong. And you guys watched a movie earlier about this. This community has common ideas, beliefs, and values regarding how to use English in their community. Within any given speech community, their norms and expectations about how to communicate will depend in part upon the situation. So, for example, some situations that will be treated differently in Hong Kong speech community would be ordering food at a restaurant versus hanging out with college buddies versus speaking to one's grandmother versus speaking with one's parents versus giving a political speech, etc. So all those things have kind of different norms and expectations. Now, as opposed to a situation, which is a broader context for communicating, speech events are specific activities that occur within that situation. So, for example, at a restaurant, in the process of ordering, um, the process of ordering is a speech event, and the process of paying is another speech event. The typical conventional ways that people would talk when ordering food, asking for the bill, etc. A speech event has a series of moves or a sequence in which things are typically done. Take a phone call as an example. The phone rings, that's the first move. One picks it up, that's the next move. Then greetings, two more moves. How are yous, two more moves. And then the caller raises the first topic. So that's a speech event with a particular series of expectations about what things are said and when. And finally, the smallest unit at which things can vary is the speech act. The speech act is usually an individual utterance or act in the larger speech event. So in a typical greeting sequence, there are two speech acts, a greeting and then the return greeting. And in a typical classroom interaction, there are three speech acts. A lot of people talk about this classroom interaction being IRE, initiation, response, evaluation. Initiation is the teacher's question. The response is a student response. And then the teacher evaluates, okay, good, or not quite, Johnny, try better luck next time, or something like that. So the way that one would engage in a speech act will depend upon the other aspects of the context. For example, how would you greet a hostess in a restaurant versus your college buddies? That would be very different in most cases. So Hymes developed the speaking paradigm. Each of these dimensions describes a different aspect of communication that can vary across context. So in different contexts, the setting and scene will be different, participants will be different, the outcomes and goals will be different, the sequence of messages, their form and content will be different. The tone, like is it humorous or ironic or is it, very serious, that kind of thing. Instrumentalities, those are the modes and channels in which communication takes place. The norms of interaction and interpretation will be different, and then the genre, traditionally recognized formal characteristics, will be different. So when we talk about language as a social practice, we're saying that speaking and listening must prepare learners for engaging in authentic forms of social communication. And speaking and listening instruction must address not only how language refers to things, the ideational function, but also how language is used to mark and create social relationships and identities, the interpersonal function, and how language is used to construct and tie together longer stretches of interaction and discourse, the textual function. Speaking and listening instruction must address more than skills like pronunciation and grammar and knowledge, vocabulary, or knowledge of speech acts, but also learners and speakers' strategies for communicating effectively. Now for each of these screencasts, I only have 15 minutes, and amazingly, we're almost out of time. Time flies when you're having fun. So I want you to go through the rest of these slides. In one of the slides, you're going to have a link to this figure. And if you can't link to it from the PowerPoint, it's also in the module. But you're going to see these are the standards. This is one of the standards for TESOL, communicating for social, intercultural, and instructional purposes. And what this is at the level 6 to 8, which is grade level, right, for students who are in grade level 6 to 8, you may have a number of levels of proficiency. So even though they're in grade level 6 to 8, one student might be at level 1 proficiency, like the beginning level, and another student might be more advanced. So, but within level 6 to 8, you could say for level one students, you might expect them to be able to do this, and